Welcome back to Northeast Legends and Stories, where we dive deep into the rich tapestry of the Northeast's past, uncovering tales that have shaped its history and captured imaginations across generations. I'm your host, Mike D, and tonight we are going on an absolute odyssey with the single most unhinged, most successful, most gloriously ridiculous human being ever to draw breath between the Kennebec and the Hudson, Timothy Dexter. Self-declared Lord of Newburyport, eighth grade dropout, international merchant, author of the only book in American history that ships with a blank page of punctuation marks so readers can salt and pepper the text themselves, shipper of bed-warming pans to the equator, coal to Newcastle, stray cats to the Caribbean, stray dogs to Georgia plantations, Bibles to pagans, mittens to the tropics, and the only man on record who faked his own death, threw a wake for 3,000 people, and then beat his wife with a cane because she refused to cry at his own funeral. He died in 1806, worth the modern equivalent of $8 to $10 million, hated by the elite, beloved by children and drunk sailors, and still laughing. But before we ride this glorious train wreck from beginning to end, let's just sit with the fact that New England is the world capital of weaponized eccentricity. We are the region that produced a man who spent 40 years building a palace out of coral with his bare hands in Florida because a girl broke his heart in Massachusetts. We produced the woman in Bangor who held seances so convincing that half the state still swears Abraham Lincoln showed up in 1872. We produced the Rhode Island vampire panic of 1892, where families dug up their own dead daughters to burn their hearts. We produced the Vermont farmer who declared his 120-acre farm the Independent Republic of Indian Stream in 1832 and fought a tiny war with Canada. We produced the lighthouse keeper on Boone Island who trained a squadron of seagulls to line up and flap their wings every time the flag was raised. We produced the guy in Milton, New Hampshire who has lived in a treehouse since 1989 because the selectmen told him his yurt was illegal. We produced the Dover Demon, the Bridgewater Triangle, the Saco River Curse, and Lizzie Borden, who gave her parents 40 whacks and then went on to live quietly with her sister and a house full of cats. Timothy Dexter is not an outlier. He is the final boss. So let's go all the way back to the very beginning because this origin story is almost too on the nose. January 22nd, 1747, Malden, Massachusetts. A nor'easter, the likes of which old-timers still talk about. Snow so deep, the oxen can't find the barn. Into a dirt floor farmhouse owned by a day laborer named Samuel Dexter, and his long-suffering wife comes their seventh child, Timothy. The family is Irish, poor and proud in the way only the Irish poor can be. Samuel Dexter can barely sign his name. Timothy's mother dies when he's small. There is no money for school. By age 8, he's barefoot in the snow, pulling frozen turnips and carrying water from a spring half a mile away. By age 14, he's indentured for 9 years to a leather dresser in Charlestown, which means 9 years of standing knee-deep in lime vats, oak bark liquor, and dog manure, scraping the hair off cowhides until your skin cracks and the stink never quite leaves your fingernails. When the indenture ends in 1767, his master, as was custom, hands him freedom dues, one brand new suit of broadcloth clothes. Timothy sells the suit the same afternoon for cash money, ties everything he owns in a red bandana handkerchief, and walks the 25 miles north to Newburyport with the grin of a man who has decided the universe owes him a fortune and he's come to collect. Newburyport in 1767 is the wildest, richest, drunkest port between Portland and Philadelphia. 40 wharves, 100 sail lofts, rope walks a quarter-mile long, distilleries turning West Indian molasses into rum so fast the air smells like burnt sugar and sin. Privateers are bringing in Spanish prizes worth hundreds of thousands. Ship captains strut around in silk waistcoats and swords. A smart kid with hustle can become a millionaire before 30, and a dumb one can die of rum and smallpox before 25. Timothy starts at the absolute bottom, sleeping in haylofts above taverns, hawking mittens and gloves on the docks, eating whatever the cooks scrape off the plates. He's 6 feet tall, raw-boned, red-haired, freckled, talks with a thick North Shore Irish accent that makes the word merchant come out marchant, and he cannot spell his own middle name, his own. Then, in 1770, at age 23, he does the one undeniably brilliant thing he will ever do in his entire life. He marries 32-year-old Elizabeth Lord Frothingham, a childless, sharp-tongued rich widow who owns a thriving dry goods store on State Street and a bank account that could choke a whale. The wedding is the scandal of the season. The old families clutch their pearls. A leather dresser marrying Elizabeth Frothingham? This is what happens when you let the Irish vote. Elizabeth doesn't give a damn what anyone thinks. She likes the kid's nerve, his grin, and the fact that he's tall enough to reach the top shelves without a ladder. They get married, and with her money, Timothy buys the grandest house in Newburyport, the former mansion of Nathaniel Tracy, the richest merchant in town, right on High Street with a view straight down to the Merrimack where the big ships tie up. 3 stories, hip roof, widow's walk, ballroom on the 3rd floor, mahogany paneling, marble fireplaces, the whole 9 yards. He hangs out a sign that reads, Timothy Dexter, merchant, and starts dealing in everything he knows from his tannery days. Leather breeches, gloves, mittens, whale oil candles, anything that stinks. They have 2 children. Nancy turns out sharp as a tack and eventually marries well. Samuel does not. Samuel is what the 18th century politely called weak in the head, and what we would probably diagnose as intellectually disabled. Timothy dotes on him, spoils him, and then rages when the boy can't read or tie his own shoes. Elizabeth bears it all with the patience of a saint who has decided sainthood is easier than divorce. Life is looking up. Then the American Revolution happens, and this is where the legend truly ignites. Congress starts printing continental dollars like a teenager with a counterfeit app. By 1780, the currency is so worthless that people are using it to caulk windows and light pipes. A pair of shoes that cost $5 in 1776 now costs $500. And the money is still losing value by the week. Soldiers are paid in wagon loads of the stuff and immediately trade it for rum or tobacco. The phrase, not worth a continental, becomes the national punchline. Everyone is laughing, everyone except Timothy Dexter. He starts buying the paper by the trunkful, by the barrelful, paying 1 or 2 cents on the dollar with the money Elizabeth brought to the marriage. His neighbors think he has finally lost whatever small marbles he ever possessed. Timothy's gone clean daft, they say over their port and cigars in the private clubs on State Street. That paper is only good for kindling or outhouse duty. Fast forward to the 1790s. The new Constitution is in place. Alexander Hamilton works his funding and assumption magic, and Massachusetts and the federal government start redeeming old continental currency at full face value plus interest. Timothy's attic full of trash paper turns into tens of thousands of dollars overnight, enough to make him one of the richest men in Essex County. He buys ships, big, beautiful, 3-masted brigs named Mehitabel, Congress, and Remittance, and starts trading rum, sugar, molasses, leather, and whatever else he can get his hands on all over the Atlantic world. This is when the old money crowd decides it's time to destroy him the old-fashioned way. By tricking him into business disasters so colossal, he'll be ruined and they can laugh him back to the tannery where he belongs. First prank. Timothy, my boy, the West Indies are absolutely desperate for bed-warming pans. Load a ship. A bed-warming pan is a long-handled brass pan you fill with coals and slide between the sheets on a January night when the harbor is frozen solid and your toes are about to snap off. Pure New England technology. Timothy buys hundreds of them, fills the hold of one of his ships, and sends it south. The captain gets to Saint-Domingue or Martinique, steps ashore and realizes it's 95 degrees in the shade and the humidity could drown a fish. Instead of sailing home ruined, he walks inland to the sugar plantations and sells the entire cargo as giant ladles for skimming foam off boiling molasses vats. Comes home with double the investment and a bonus of raw sugar. Second prank. Wool mittens, Timothy. The islands can't keep wool mittens in stock. Timothy ships crate after crate of thick, scratchy, double-knit New England mittens. A Portuguese merchant in port buys the lot on speculation, ships them to Siberia where it's 50 below zero for 6 months a year, and makes a killing. Timothy triples his money, Third and greatest prank. Coal Timothy. Ship coal to Newcastle. Newcastle upon Tyne has been the coal capital of the planet since the 1300s. The phrase, carrying coals to Newcastle, is in Samuel Johnson's dictionary as the gold standard of pointless activity. Timothy shrugs, fills a ship with beautiful, clean-burning Pennsylvania anthracite, and sends it across the Atlantic. He arrives in the middle of a bitter, months-long miners' strike. The pits are shut, the city is freezing, factories are idle, and the only coal available is Timothy Dexter's. He sells it for famine prices and comes home rich enough to buy another ship, a new carriage, and thumb his nose at the entire Newburyport Chamber of Commerce. The stories keep piling up like cordwood after a hurricane. He ships thousands of stray cats to Caribbean islands that are overrun with rats after the sugarcane harvest. Plantation owners pay gold per cat and name their firstborn after him. He ships crates of Bibles to the pagan East Indies. British missionaries snap them up and beg for more. He accidentally hoards tens of thousands of whalebone corset stays right before a European fashion craze makes every woman from Paris to Petersburg squeeze into 18-inch waists. He rounds up stray dogs in Boston by the hundreds and ships them south, because Georgia and Carolina plantations need guard dogs that aren't afraid of alligators. He even ships a hold full of Russian fur hats to Jamaica, because they'll love the style. A passing Royal Navy frigate buys the lot for Arctic patrols. Everything he touches turns to gold, and the harder his enemies try to ruin him, the richer and more insufferable he becomes. By the mid-1790s, Timothy Dexter is worth the modern equivalent of $8 to $10 million, and he decides it is high time Newburyport bowed down to its new king. They do not. So he builds his own kingdom right there on High Street. He turns the Tracy Mansion into a cross between Versailles and a fever dream. He adds gilded eagles on every corner post, minarets that look like they were stolen from a Baghdad mosque, a cupola big enough for a 20-piece orchestra to play dances. Then, in the front and side yards, he commissions 40 life-sized wooden statues from a local sign painter and jack-of-all-trades named Joseph Wilson. There's George Washington dressed like a Roman senator in a toga, Thomas Jefferson holding the Declaration of Independence, Alexander Hamilton looking smug, John Hancock with his giant signature Napoleon Bonaparte mid-stride, Admiral Lord Nelson with one arm and one eye, William Pitt the Younger frowning at taxes, Louis XVI looking confused, and right in the very center, not one but two statues of Timothy Dexter himself. One is labeled in foot-high golden letters, "I am the first in the East, the first in the West, and the greatest philosopher in the Western world." The other simply says, "Lord Timothy Dexter." He hires uniformed guards in red coats to keep children from throwing rocks. They still throw rocks. A town crier who walks ahead of him banging a gong and shouting, "Make way for his lordship," and a kid with a trumpet who plays a fanfare every time he steps out the front door. He buys a second estate up in Chester, New Hampshire, and declares himself Lord Dexter, Earl of Chester. Children who bow and call him "Your Lordship" get a bright new copper penny. Adults who do it get invited to dinner and all the rum they can drink. Farmers who refuse get a visit from his guards. He hires a full-time poet laureate, a fish peddler and street bard named Jonathan Yankee Plummer, who follows him around, composing instant odes on a battered lute. One of Plummer's greatest hits, "Lord Dexter is a man of fame, most celebrated is his name. More precious far than gold that's pure, Lord Dexter shine forevermore. He's great in wisdom, great in power. His fame increases every hour." The household staff is its own traveling circus. His major domo and de facto prime minister is a tall, regal black woman known as Madame Luce Lancaster. Rumored to be the daughter of an African king sold into slavery, who runs the entire mansion like a naval vessel and is the only human being on Earth Timothy is visibly afraid of. When he gets drunk and reaches for a pistol to settle some imagined slight, Luce takes the gun away, boxes his ears, and tells him to sit down and eat his pudding. There's a one-eyed fiddler who claims to have sailed with Blackbeard, a dwarf doorman in full livery, a deaf-mute footman who communicates only in dramatic gestures, And for a brief, glorious period, a pet bear on a chain in the garden until it escapes one Sunday morning and chases the congregational minister 3 blocks and up an apple tree. And then, around 1803, he pulls the greatest stunt in American history. He's 56, gout is eating his legs like acid, and he's obsessed with his legacy. He wants to know exactly how famous he is, so he does what any rational person would do. He fakes his own death. He spreads the word that Lord Dexter has died of apoplexy while at sea on one of his ships. He invites the entire town to the wake. 3,000 people show up, literally half the population of Newburyport. There's a mile-long funeral procession with black plumes on the horses, muffled drums, a brass band playing the Dead March from Saul, Jonathan Plummer reciting a 200-line elegy he composed overnight, and every important person in Essex County delivering eulogies dripping with sarcasm and relief. Timothy hides upstairs behind a velvet curtain, peeking through the blinds, absolutely delighted. Look at the crowd, they love me. But his wife Elizabeth refuses to cry. She's too busy making sure the punch bowls are full, the funeral baked meats are hot, and the servants don't steal the silver. Timothy loses his mind. He bursts out of hiding in his dressing gown, roaring, "Woman, have you no tears for your departed lord?" and starts beating her across the shoulders with his gold-headed cane in front of 3,000 horrified people. The fake mourners scream, knock over coffins, there wasn't even a body, and scatter into the street. The story makes newspapers from Boston to London to Philadelphia. Timothy considers the whole thing a smashing success. Now the world knows I'm famous. In 1802, still stinging from every snub he's ever received in his life, he sits down and writes the strangest book in American literature, A Pickle for the Knowing Ones, or Plain Truths in a Homespun Dress. 8,000 words, 0 punctuation, random capitalization, spelling, that looks like it was done by a committee of drunk sailors trying to text. He attacks politicians, all rogues, clergymen, hypocrites all, doctors, murderers, lawyers, school teachers, and spends several pages explaining that his wife Elizabeth is actually dead, and the woman living in his house is her ghost who keeps haunting him for his money. The first edition ends with a full blank page of periods, commas, exclamation points, and semicolons, because so many readers wrote to complain about the lack of punctuation. His note at the bottom, "Now the knowing ones may pepper and salt it as they please." He prints it himself in Salem, stands on street corners handing copies out for free like a lunatic prophet, and it goes through 8 editions in his lifetime. It is still in print today. Mark Twain called it a brain-wrecking effort. Oliver Wendell Holmes said Dexter had done for American literature what the Revolution did for government, freed it from the tyranny of rules. By 1806, the rum no longer helps the gout. The parties slow down. He softens a little toward Elizabeth, sort of, leaves money in his will for the poor of Newburyport and Malden, and on October 23, 1806, actually dies in his bed, no hoax this time. He's buried in Old Hill burying ground under a plain marble tablestone that doesn't even say, Lord. Elizabeth follows him 3 years later. The mansion becomes a hotel, then a rooming house, then burns almost to the ground in 1988 and is rebuilt as luxury condos. The statues topple in storms one by one. Most are chopped up for kindling. A few survivors, George Washington's head, William Pitt's torso, end up in museums with little tags that say, attributed to Joseph Wilson, commissioned by Timothy Dexter, Newburyport eccentric. So what do we do with this man? He is the original American troll, the patron saint of every New England oddball who ever looked at polite society, gave it the middle finger, and built a 40-statue tribute to himself in the front yard. He proved that in this hard, cold corner of the world, pure nerve, blind luck, and a complete refusal to be embarrassed can sometimes beat Harvard degrees, old money, and common sense into a cocked hat. Timothy Dexter looked at a world that laughed at him and answered by shipping warming pans to the West Indies, coal to Newcastle, stray cats to rat-infested islands, and then went home, put on a silk dressing gown, had his poet laureate announce that dinner was served, and died richer than every single person who ever called him a fool. And somewhere tonight, In whatever Valhalla is reserved for glorious, unredeemable lunatics, Lord Timothy Dexter is still laughing louder than anybody else in the room. Thanks for listening to Northeast Legends and Stories. If this one made you laugh until you cried, or made you want to read a book with no punctuation, or made you consider shipping mittens to Miami, do us a favor. Leave a review, tell a friend, and the next time someone tells you your idea is stupid, just smile and say, "Yeah, but have you ever shipped coal to Newcastle?" See you next time, somewhere deep in the weird, wonderful Northeast.